the greatest tragedy in U.S. Navy history. It began with a promise that should never have been made. 5 brothers, standing side by side, refusing to be separated, and the Navy said yes. But war doesn't honor promises. It breaks them. December 7th, 1941. The world changed overnight. The attack on Pearl Harbor dragged the United States into a war that would consume millions of lives. Across the country, young men rushed to enlist. Some out of duty, some out of anger, and some out of loyalty. In Waterloo, Iowa, 5 brothers made a decision that would define their legacy forever. George, Francis, Joseph, Madison, Albert, the Sullivan Brothers. They were not generals, they were not famous, just 5 working-class young men who grew up together, lived together, and chose to fight together. Their bond was simple, unbreakable. Where one went, the others followed. So when they decided to join the U.S. Navy, they made one condition clear. They would serve on the same ship, together, at all times, no exceptions. At the time, the Navy allowed it. Maybe it seemed harmless. Maybe it even seemed admirable. 5 brothers, united by loyalty, willing to face war as one. But that decision would lead to one of the most devastating tragedies in naval history. In February 1942, the brothers were assigned to a ship, a light cruiser, USS Juneau. They boarded together. They trained together. They lived side by side, just as they always had. To them, it probably felt right, familiar, almost comforting in the middle of chaos. But far away in the Pacific Ocean, a storm was building. By November 1942, the war had intensified. The Pacific theater was brutal, unforgiving, relentless. The U.S. Navy was engaged in fierce combat near Guadalcanal, a strategic island, a battlefield soaked in tension and uncertainty. The USS Juneau was part of a larger naval force, moving through dangerous waters, waters where enemy submarines lurked silently, waiting, watching. November 13th, 1942. The night was dark, the ocean deceptively calm. Then everything changed. A Japanese submarine detected the American fleet. It launched torpedoes, deadly, precise. But not all weapons find their intended target. One torpedo missed its original objective, and instead struck the USS Juneau. The impact was violent, but the ship didn't sink immediately. There was damage, chaos, fear, but there was still hope. For a brief moment, survival seemed possible. Then came the second strike, another torpedo. This time, catastrophic. It hit near the ship's ammunition storage, the magazine. And in an instant, everything was gone. The explosion tore the ship apart. A massive fireball erupted into the sky. Steel twisted. The vessel shattered. And within less than a minute, the USS Juneau disappeared beneath the ocean. Hundreds of sailors were thrown into the water. Some injured, some unconscious, some already gone. Out of nearly 700 men on board, only a handful would survive. And among the chaos, the Sullivan Brothers were lost. Some reports suggest 1 or 2 may have survived the initial explosion, floating, clinging to debris, drifting in an endless ocean. But rescue did not come in time. The survivors waited. Hours passed, then days. The sun burned during the day. The cold consumed them at night.
Sharks circled. Thirst took over. Injuries worsened. And one by one, the survivors disappeared. Out of nearly 700 men, only 10 survived. 10. The Sullivan Brothers were not among them. Back in Iowa, life continued. At least on the surface. The Sullivan family waited, hoping, praying, believing that somehow their sons were safe. But deep down, there was a silence, a feeling that something wasn't right. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into uncertainty. Until finally, the Navy arrived. A knock on the door. The kind of knock no family ever wants to hear. 5 sons, gone. At once. No final goodbye. No last letter. No closure. Just loss. Unimaginable loss. The news spread quickly, not just through Waterloo, but across the entire nation. People were shocked. 5 brothers lost in a single moment of war. It wasn't just a tragedy, it was a symbol of the cost of war, of the danger of unity in the face of destruction. The story of the Sullivan Brothers changed everything. The military realized something had to change, that no family should ever face such a loss again. And so, a new policy was born, a policy that would prevent siblings from serving in the same unit, a rule written not in theory, but in blood. But beyond policy, beyond military strategy, there was something deeper. A question. Was it wrong for them to stay together? Or was it the most human thing they could have done? Because in a world filled with fear, they chose loyalty. In a world filled with uncertainty, they chose each other. And in the end, they never broke that promise. Today, their story lives on, not just as a tragedy, but as a reminder of sacrifice, of brotherhood, of the price of war. Their names are remembered, their legacy honored, and their story told so that we never forget. Because sometimes the greatest acts of courage don't happen on the battlefield. They happen in the choices we make before we ever get there. And sometimes the strongest bond is also the one that hurts the most. 5 brothers, 1 ship, 1 moment, and a story that would change history forever.